Welcome to 21st Sports recap and reaction for the Detroit Lions at the New Orleans Saints in their Week 15 matchup played December 21st, 2015. We're going to go over the scores and the stats and give our breakdown and analysis for this Monday Night Football game between two teams that really didn't have too much to play for. I guess they're playing for who's got the better position in the draft, but still, even with the losing record and no chance of making the playoffs, you got to build towards next year because there always is next year, and that is a good thing. And as much as these two teams have struggled, they do have a lot of talent on both of their rosters, and they both have two of the more prolific passers in the last few years. Both of these guys have thrown for over 5,000 yards in a season just a few years ago. And Drew Brees actually in this game would end up passing the 60,000 yard passing mark, and he would go over 4,000 passing yards for the 10th straight season, which is an NFL record that he already held and is just extending. But as for this game, the scoring started off with Detroit. Matthew Stafford hit Golden Tate for a 1-yard touchdown with a little less than 8 minutes still left in the first quarter. Prater added the extra point, and it was 7-0 Lions over the Saints. Then with just over a minute still left in the first, Kai Forbath hit a 45-yard field goal, and that put the Saints' first points on the board as they cut the Lions' lead to 4 with the score Detroit 7, New Orleans 3. So that did it for the first, and less than a minute into the second, just less than 2 minutes after the Saints got that field goal, the Lions responded with a scoring drive as Matthew Stafford wasted little time getting down the field, and he hit Michael Burton for a 4-yard touchdown. Prater had the extra point, and it was now 14-3 as Detroit extended their lead to 11. Then with about 4.5 minutes still left before halftime, Stafford hit Golden Tate for a 5-yard touchdown pass, which capped off a nearly 7-minute drive, just under 7 minutes, and Prater added the extra point, and it was 21-3. Now, just before halftime, the Saints would end up driving down the field and getting into the red zone as they would get all the way down to the 1-yard line. So they got all the way down to the 1-yard line, but then just kind of craziness ensued as first they had a touchdown by Hightower, but then a penalty for an illegal formation pushed them back to the 5, and then on 3rd and goal from the 1, they got stopped for no gain, and so now it would be 4th and goal from the 1, and they elected to go for it, and so Detroit tried to call a timeout, but they didn't have any timeouts, and then so they replayed the down, and then it looked like Holston maybe had a touchdown, but it was ruled an ineligible downfield pass, and so then because of the penalty on the offense, they said, nope, that's it, half over. So the Saints get just 1 yard away from the end zone, but they couldn't get it into the end zone, and so it would be 21-3 at halftime with the Lions firmly in control of this game as they were just dominating the first half of this one. And then in the third quarter, with just under 12 minutes still left in the third, Amir Abdullah scored on a 15-yard touchdown run. Prater added the extra point, and it was 28-3 Lions over the Saints. Then with about 5 minutes still left in the third, Drew Brees hit Brandon Cooks for a 27-yard touchdown. Forbath added the extra point, and it was now 28-10 as the Saints trailed by 18. So that would be the score after 3. And in the fourth quarter, just 2 minutes in, Forbath hit a 22-yard field goal. That made it 28-13. And then just 3 minutes later, Drew Brees hit Marquise Colston for an 11-yard touchdown. Forbath added the extra point, and it was now an 8-point game with the score 28-20. But the Lions responded with about a 5-minute drive capped off by a 1-yard touchdown run by Joique Bell. Prater added the extra point, and it was now 35-20 as the Lions went back up by 2 scores. But then with about 2 minutes left in this game, Drew Brees hits Ben Watson for a 1-yard touchdown. Forbath added the extra point, and it was now a 1-score game as the Saints cut the Lions' lead to 8 points with the score 35-27. So now at this point, they needed an onside kick because they needed 8 points to tie the game and send it into overtime, but they were not able to get it. Megatron didn't do much in this game, but he did recover that onside kick attempt. And so now the Lions would get the ball with less than 2 minutes left to play. And on first down, they give it to Joique Bell, and Joique Bell runs it 36 yards all the way from the New Orleans 45, where the onside kick had been recovered, down to the 9-yard line. So now the Lions were in the red zone. And it looked like, well, they're just going to run out the clock as New Orleans used their second timeout. They gave it back to Bell, who lost a yard, but the Saints had to use their final timeout. So now the Lions had Matthew Stafford take 2 knees and line up for the field goal, as they ended up actually getting a penalty for delay of game on fourth down, which pushed them back to the 20. And of course, they lost a few yards on each of the knees. But now, with just about 15 seconds left in the game, Prater came out to put this one away with a 38-yard field goal that would make it an 11-point lead. There'd be 2 scores, and there'd be no chance for the Saints to tie it up. Instead, the kick is no good. He just kicks it all the way right, and he was, a little bit to the left, and it went all the way right. So he misses it wide right, no good. And that was a chip shot, 38 yards. I mean, it's just 5 yards more than an extra point, but there you go. And so now the Saints take over after the missed field goal, still with a chance to tie the game, but just with seconds on the clock. And an incomplete pass on first down brought it to second down. And on second down, Brees went to Hightower. He picked up 18 yards, but that would be it, as this game would come to a close, and the Lions hold on to win this one 35-27. The Lions are now 5-9 with the win, 2-5 on the road, and New Orleans is 5-9 with the loss. They're 3-4 at home. So the Lions, they pretty much dominated this game. They jumped out to that lead early on, and they never trailed at any point in this game. Golden Tate had that touchdown, with about 8 minutes still left in the first, put them up 7-0. And then they were up 21-3. As the Saints failed to get any points at the end of the half there. And then Amir Abdullah, scored that touchdown in the, to open up the second half to make it 28-3. Just total domination. But then the Saints, they started coming back. The Lions, they kind of let up, playing a little prevent. And Drew Brees, he can toss the rock. And in my opinion, Drew Brees is definitely a Hall of Famer, without a doubt. As I said at the open of this, he passed 60,000 passing yards in his career. He also went over 4,000 passing yards for the 10th straight year. He's also gone over 5,000 just a couple years ago. But Brees is a Hall of Famer, and you give him game time, he's gonna get the team in the end zone, especially once you start playing on your heels and kind of lax on the defense. And they let him get back into it. But then as soon as they made it a one-score game, the Lions came right back down. They responded with that scoring drive. As Bell scored another touchdown there with about 5.5 left. And then at the end, Detroit, even once they got the onside kick, you saw Bell just ran it right up the gut, right down their throats. And you figure, oh, wow, it's totally over now. And then Prater missed the field goal and gave the Saints one last chance to send it to overtime, but it would not happen as Detroit holds on to win this one. He said in a game that they pretty much dominated from the onset. But, both these teams are pretty much looking forward to next year, but they do have a lot of talent to build on, as both these teams could be in contention next year, just with a few small adjustments, and bringing in some of the, right people. Of course, a lot of that has to do with their coaching staffs, as both these teams have had their coaching staffs, kind of overhauled just in the middle of the year. But as for this game, though, Matthew Stafford, 22 for 25, 254 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. Amir Abdullah had 9 carries for 77 yards and a touchdown. He also had 2 receptions for 12 yards, which gave him 89 total yards in this game. Joique Bell had 8 carries for 71 yards and a touchdown. He also had 2 receptions for 30 yards, which gave him 101 total yards in the game. Eric Ebron had 4 catches for 79 yards, and Golden Tate, the former Fighting Irishman, had 6 catches for 45 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Theo Riddick had 2 catches for 27 yards and 2 rushes for 3 yards, giving him 30 total yards in this game. And for the Saints, Drew Brees was 34 for 52, 341 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. Tim Hightower, 13 carries for 54 yards. Hightower also had 3 catches for 31 yards, which gave him a total of 85 yards in this game. Brandon Cook had 10 catches for 124 yards and a touchdown. Willie Snead, 10 catches for 76 yards. And Benjamin Watson, the former Patriot, had 6 catches for 49 yards and a touchdown. Marquise Colston, 2 catches for 39 yards and a touchdown as well. And for the kickers in this game, Matt Prater was 0 for 1 on the field goals, but he was 5 for 5 on the extra points. And Kai Forbath, 2 for 2 on the field goals, 3 for 3 on the extra points, as he was perfect in the game. We look at the defense for Detroit. Stephen Tulloch had a forced fumble, and Jones had a sack. And for the Saints, Stephon Anthony had a forced fumble, and Cam Jordan had a sack, and Adebali had 2 sacks. Then we look at the team stats: 27 first downs for the Saints, 24 first downs for the Lions. And on third down, Detroit was 4 for 8, 50% conversion rate for Detroit. The Saints, 5 for 14, 35% conversion rate for the Saints. They went for it twice on fourth down, and they converted both times for 100% on fourth down. Then we look at the total net yards: 399 for New Orleans, 396 for Detroit. And on the ground, the Lions netted 150 and the Saints netted 69 yards. Detroit netting almost twice as many per rushing play, as they averaged 6.5 yards on the ground per rush, and the Saints just 3.8. But through the air, the Saints netted 330. Drew Brees sacked once for a loss of 11 yards. And for Detroit, they netted 246 through the air. Stafford was sacked 3 times, losing a total of 8 yards. And in this game, the penalties racked up against the Lions, but they wouldn't cost them. But they had 10 penalties for 92 yards. The Saints, 6 penalties for 28 yards. The Lions had 2 fumbles in the game. They recovered 1. They lost 1. New Orleans fumbled once, but they recovered their own fumble. And then we look at the red zone: 5 for 6 for Detroit, 83%, and that's a recipe for success. And New Orleans, 2 for 4, just 50% in the red zone. Time of possession: 30 minutes, 24 seconds for New Orleans, 29 minutes, 36 seconds for Detroit. So Detroit, like I said, they jumped out to that big lead, and then pretty much the Saints just started racking up numbers in garbage time there on out, and then ended up making things interesting down the stretch, but they came up just short. One thing I thought was interesting about this game is that ESPN, and especially Gruden in particular, used the opportunity to disparage Jimmy Graham. And it's like, what? Jimmy Graham's not even playing in this game. He's with the Seahawks. And why would you take the time to be like, oh yeah, let's just try to bury Jimmy Graham? Because they brought up this whole thing about real tight ends. And who's a real tight end? I'm sure you're really concerned about that, right, Tirico and Gruden? But the real tight ends, and they're saying how, the guys that they said are real tight ends. Yes, those guys are really good tight ends, no doubt about that. And they included Ben Watson in that group, and I'm a fan of Ben Watson. Nothing against Ben Watson. But what are they talking about? Real tight ends. What they're saying is that Jimmy Graham is not a real tight end. That's what that's about. It's about how Jimmy Graham, in the offseason, he wanted to be franchise tagged as a receiver and not a tight end, because his argument was that he lines up in the slot. And so, when he's lining up, most times, the percentage-wise, he's not lining up in the, traditional tight end, position. He's not lining up right there on the line, right next to the tackle. Usually it would be the right tackle. But instead, he's off the line. He's over, in the slot. He's lining up even as the 1 or even 2 receiver, as, a Saint when he was with the Saints, and how he had wanted to, his franchise tag to reflect that, and his, statistics and where he lined up on plays, like in percentage of plays. That was his argument, that he actually was more of a hybrid and closer to a receiver as opposed to a tight end. So they're like, yeah, real tight ends. And I mean, yes, I definitely think that you can make the argument that Drew Brees had a lot to do with the success of Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham's still very talented, no doubt about that. But we got Drew Brees throwing you the rock. I mean, hey, he's one of the best quarterbacks. But they made each other look good. And with Brees, though, he can make other guys look good, just the same. Jimmy Graham, though, going to the Seahawks, I mean, it's a different system. He's got to kind of come in and learn their way of doing things. He might not have necessarily, had a good year and then he got injured and everything like that. But, I mean, come on. Really, you're going to, do this whole thing about, oh, yeah, who's a real tight end? And then they don't even, say Jimmy Graham. But you know that that's what they're doing. It's a dig at Jimmy Graham and his attempt to collect on the receiver franchise as opposed to the tight end franchise. And then saying, oh, yeah, now they've got a real tight end. But anyway, that's just what I thought about that. If you agree or disagree, that's perfectly fine. You can leave that in the comment section below, because I am interested to read your thoughts and opinions. But thank you very much for listening. It is greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and had a great weekend, and have a great week and have a Merry Christmas and enjoy all the sports.